Former New Mexico Governor Gary Johnson became the 2016 nominee for president at the Libertarian Party convention last week. Mr. Johnson was a Republican when he served 2 terms here as governor. Now, there's a lot to unpack in this latest political news. I'm joined this week by Tom Garrity from the Garrity Group PR. Eddie Aragon's here. He's CEO of The Rock of Talk on 95.9 FM on your dial. Marcia Garcia from Strategies 360 is here. And Vicki Harrison from Common Cause, New Mexico. Tom, I'm telling you right now, here's an opportunity for libertarians. Let's see how we unpack this one. There's a lot of angst out there amongst both Democrats and Republicans out there. People are unhappy with what's going on in their own parties and the other party. What is the opportunity for libertarians here?
It's a great opportunity for a third party to come in. Libertarians just happen to be that third party. You know, there's so much angst right now in the country over the presumptive nominees for Republicans and Democrats that, you know, you have a fiscal conservative, somebody who's a little goofy. I mean, granted, I think people
would make him smile if he was sitting here. If you heard
absolutely.
That.
I mean, you know, but he's a physical conservative. He's tough on government. And he's just think back of his time when he was here in New Mexico. I think he has all the makings to really make a powerful impact. And now with his vice presidential running mate, Bill Weld, Governor Weld, I should say, I think that there's they could make a strong opportunity. Now, the big challenge will be, will they be able to get on the debates? Because if they get onto that national stage, then that's instant name recognition, and I think that they could sway some. But I think that is, to answer your question, yes, there's an opportunity.
Interesting. Eddie, I've talked to a lot of people about this ticket that Tom just talked about. Bill Weld as VP candidate with Mr. Johnson. For a lot of folks, this is almost a dream ticket. Do you know what I mean? In a just world, these guys would be elevated to a certain place with these other people. What makes them less or more qualified than anybody else? We have 16 years of governing experience here between these two, of being a governor. Does that not make them viable?
I think it's a great resume, but there are Republicans running as libertarians. So they're moving over, then you have Democrats, you know, running as Republicans in Donald Trump's case. So, I mean, when you start looking at the way this whole thing, I mean, it's a great opportunity to Tom's point about a third party, but, you know, really this whole thing is about money. How much money will it be able to get? You know, will the Libertarian Party be viable? Or are we looking at 1980 all over again, Ed Smith, you know, when he got 1.1%? I think that's what we're looking at, to be quite honestly.
Do you think he's not going to be able to make that threshold, be able to get on a debate stage, as Tom mentioned?
He won't be impressive. He won't be commanding. His style, his presence just isn't there. What is there is, you know, the Libertarian Party. I think that, you know, a lot of people do feel libertarian once they understand what the Libertarian Party is, but there are many people, you know, he had 70% Johnson in 2012. This year he only had 55%. So he's not a purist in terms of getting, you know, those out. One of the big problems I think I have with Gary Johnson is the fact that his I side with, you know, he came out on C-SPAN and he said that I side with Bernie Sanders 73% of the time. So socialism is over here. You have libertarianism completely on the other side. So I think that's a big, you know, philosophical issue for Gary Johnson. Will he be able to communicate those principles that will advance to 15%? If he gets to 15%, will the media pick him up and take him from there? It's possible. Will the media allow him to even get 15% in the polling?
That's a big last question there. Vicki, is the country ready for a legitimate third-party candidate at this point?
Absolutely.
Can he be heard?
Absolutely. The party, you know, the party system with just 2. You know, we were talking about this earlier. We have over 300 million people in this country. And to me, I think it's kind of crazy to think that 2 people can really speak to that diverse and that large of a group. I think we need 10 people running for president. I think we need lots of people. You know, and as Eddie said, it's so frustrating that it comes down to the money. I mean, we're already seeing the stories come out about, you know, Gary Johnson won this nomination, but the media is going to tell you that he doesn't stand a chance because he doesn't have any money. It's the same thing we're hearing within the Bernie and Hillary thing. I mean, because when you look at the votes, you're like, well, wait a minute, they're almost the same, but the super delegates are different. So we have this whole, you know, and news now is not news. You know, how many times are we reading a story and you're like, oh, and then you're like, wait a minute, that was sponsored content. Or you have to now look and see who owns that blog, who owns that paper, where did they get their money from? It's not like you can just trust what you read.
That's right. Marcia, interestingly, when I go on Facebook and read about Gary Johnson, some people have a real issue with his 2 terms here, meaning almost disqualifies him automatically for national office. But a lot of other folks are like, it just doesn't matter. That was then. This is now. Should his background matter that much to you?
You know, it should, but at the same time, people should be given an opportunity to change and move forward. But I think the other thing, going back to what everybody's been talking about, is truly, can Governor Johnson get to a place where the public is going to even know who he is?
Right.
You know, and so when we start talking about getting to the 15% of support, we saw what happened to him in 2011, where he wasn't permitted on the national stage to participate in the Republican nominee debates. So will that matter? Will it even matter because people don't even know who he is?
Right.
He has no name ID.
Right.
So I think we're really going to have to see what happens as we get closer to the national debate stage to see if he and his running mate can actually garner that 15% of support, to see if they can even make the cut to get on the stage.
You know, Tom, it was interesting. Governor Johnson had a quote the other day that most people are libertarian but just don't know it. It was very interesting to hear him say that. From a Republican, it was very interesting to hear him say that. However, I'm still in this idea, can he carry a message out to the general public and specifically disaffected double-dip Bernie supporters, meaning they may have been disaffected from something else, gone to Bernie, and now that's not quite working out, and is there a home for them in Gary's tent, as they say?
Yeah, there should be. I mean,
Okay.
I think, you know, Gary Johnson has the opportunity, and this ticket has the opportunity to be all things to all people.
Right.
You know, I think their biggest hurdle, as far as with different audiences, will be the whole, you know, marijuana. You know, legalize marijuana. You know, that was kind of how the libertarians have been branded right out of the gate, and that's, you know, shame on them, because, you know, it sounds like that they have a lot more to offer.
But let me stop you right there.
Yeah.
Are not the times in their favor on the marijuana thing?
Oh,
Were they
yeah.
not ahead of the curve a little bit?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
but that's talking to a target audience. They
Gotcha.
have to
I
be
see what
able
you
to
mean.
grow their base. I mean, into, you know, those who are, you know, siding with Bernie and those who are siding with with Donald Trump.
Right.
Now, you know, one of the opportunities, I think, is that if the Democrats want a chance of really, you know, pulling ahead of Trump from the stalemate that it appears to be in right now, I think they need Gary Johnson on the stage, because Gary Johnson will virtually split that vote between Donald Trump. You know, it will split the Trump vote, because it will get that middle. Yeah, they'll bring in some Democrats, but not enough that would hinder or, you know, wound the Democratic nominee.
That's interesting. Let me have you follow up on that. The idea of a third, this happens sometimes in debates, by the way. You get this third person on stage, and it's almost like they're in cahoots with one or the other, and they can kind of get after it. Do you see an opportunity there?
We're just a few
because
days outside of the
that's-
Libertarian convention, and
That's
he's
right.
come out.
But
he's-
Johnson has said he is not afraid of Donald Trump. Actually blew him a kiss on television. Does that work in his favor?
strategy is
You know?
one of failure. He needs to attack Hillary. He needs to attack the Sanders. I mean, if he's a true libertarian, he's a true fiscal conservative, why is he not going to those people who've been occupied in government for 20 years? You know, why is he attacking Donald Trump, someone who's never even come out? He's looking for publicity. He's not going to get it by attacking Donald Trump. Donald Trump's not going to pay attention to him until he gets 50%.
He called his running mate a drunk, basically.
Yeah, how is he?
Well,
He's
the
got to
drunk,
answer
you know?
questions of immigration, ISIS, real things that people are talking about right now in this country. And he's not talking about those things. He's simply coming out and attacking. He's more that personality-driven politics, and he's going to succumb to it. And the reason why he's going to is because he's not a personality.
Interesting. Vicky, is that a point there that you have, at the general, you have to be so much more mainstream? So you end up disappointing both sides. Your base, it gets disappointed, but then mainstream folks, you're not quite mainstream enough for them. Is this his essential problem here for Gary Johnson?
It's an essential problem for every candidate.
Yeah.
Their messaging before the primary versus after the primary is a joke for most people. And if they think people aren't noticing,
Right.
they're wrong.
Right.
People are noticing. I mean, how many have we seen of both Trump and Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders? This is what they said now, and this is what they, I mean, we see those all the time.
right.
And again, this points back to when you've got two people or three people running for president, and they're pandering and trying to answer and talk to all they can't do it.
That's right.
Unless
That's right.
they're, you know, have 4 or 5 different personalities.
That's right. Marsha, interesting last point here, about 30 seconds left. Is there any place for libertarians of color in this situation, or for people of color to come into the libertarian camp, so to speak? Have you heard anything that makes it attractive?
That's a really interesting question, and I think we can also go back to what Eddie was just talking about, is that, you know, where are the issues that matter to people of color if we're talking about institutionalized racism, or if we're talking about immigration reform with a pathway to citizenship,
Sure.
if we're talking about creating jobs in a stagnant economy, especially in a place like New Mexico where we haven't recovered from the recession yet. So I think once the Libertarian Party or the Libertarian ticket starts addressing those very specific concerns, we can see how how people of color, how minority communities are going to respond to that. But at this point, we don't know yet.
Good point. When we come back to the line, we'll discuss new allegations in the ongoing case involving the department that processes food stamp applications here in New Mexico.